If you have questions during this presentation, please feel free to write them in the questions section, and I will repeat the question and answer it online. So OPI forms, these are forms that have passed through the approval of the Department of Human Services, Aging and People with Disabilities in collaboration with O4AD, the AAA directors, and then the State Unit on Aging is tasked, if you will, with helping all of you as OPI contractors be able to utilize these forms. I know that this training has been a request since I started, and so I'm appreciative of this opportunity to give you the training y'all have been asking for. I will put notes here in the presentation, and I will also be sending out handouts to those of you who didn't get the handouts I sent before noon. And the handouts will also be on the SUA website. So these forms, some of them are required due to the Home Care Worker Collective Bargaining Agreement. This is really an obligation we have then to follow the contract and to know that we are following it appropriately. It protects us from a potential grievance. So you'll see that some of these may not really pertain to our consumer as much as they pertain to the home care worker, if you will. It's important that we use updated forms. And these forms are going to be available to you in a couple of different places. And I want folks to get used to going to the DHS form server to pull them off. We will have some of them also on the State Unit on Aging website. But between Oregon Access and the form server, they're all going to be available to you. Here's a list of the forms, and I wanted to bring your attention to you on this because this is always been a question. What forms do we have to use? When do we use it? And so this particular slide should help you sort that out. One of the handouts today, and let me pull that up for us, is this Oregon Project Independence. List of forms. And this was, as I said, one of your handouts. Essentially, this came directly from the case management list of forms. So those of you who have been used to going to that for various programs that you may also be working on, this is straight from that. It was updated in March, and then we pulled it out and created our own form for today's training. This tells you who needs to have a copy of the form, being the consumer, the provider, whether that's going to also be to support staff or central office, or if there's an other. And I would like to suggest that other could mean maybe the representative if they have signed a representative agreement. But we thought this could be very helpful for us. The other handout that I sent is this. You're somewhat familiar with this. I've shared it with y'all before. It's a list of the actions that we take as OPI case managers, as well as showing us the forms that we need, when we'd need to do them, and again, where those forms would go. So I decided to enter into this conversation about forms. Not seeing the slides. I have a question from one of our participants saying she's not seeing the slides. Are you now seeing the slides? Okay. Okay. How about now? It should be up there now. Oh, good. Okay, we answered that question. Thanks, y'all. Oh, they went away again, it says. All right, we're back. We're on. Okay, we'll figure out another way to share forms that I want to show you. So when I was looking at how to organize this, I decided, why get complicated? Let's just do it by form number. And that's what we're going to do. And I know that we haven't in the past gone over as a group the workers' compensation agreement. And that's what Form 354 is. So 354 is a mandatory form. This isn't optional. We have to have it. It is signed once, and it doesn't have to be updated every year unless you have a situation come up where perhaps the consumer is not found fit to be their own representative. Then you'd probably want the representative that they've picked to be the one to sign this rather than the consumer. Essentially what it's saying with this form is that it allows the Home Care Commission to get the insurance coverage for the Home Care Commission and to go ahead and handle all the parts of the claim if there is a claim for their home care worker. It is essential that we have this. If we do not have this form on file, then they cannot hire a home care worker, and we should not be making a referral to the Home Care Commission. This is a necessary, mandatory form. So you can get this by finding it on Oregon Access in the forms, and you can type in 354, and it will be a web form on that. The 737 is the next form I want to go over. And I think this one we've talked a wee bit about last year when this came out in December as now being a mandatory form for us in OPI. The essentialness of this is to confirm that our consumer for OPI services is aware of what their responsibilities are for a home care worker employer. So in this, we go through and we see the information. Here, I would say this is a form that needs to be done face-to-face. It's done during, if you don't have one in your file, it's done during your review or done during an intake. And you're going through this and you are helping the consumer look at whether they want to do it or whether they want their representative to do it. And certainly we're serving folks who have a full assist in cognition, and perhaps it's their spouse who makes all the decisions. Then they would sign this first as, say I was doing it for my spouse, I would sign the form then, Gary Abrams by Sandy Abrams, and I would show that if I had a power of attorney or if I'm the rep, and I would put that in there. And then I would be signing, when you look at the second page of this form, there's an agreement to do the work of this form. And that's what we would be looking at is, what is the consumer going to do and what is the representative going to do, or are they going to do it all? And when you look at the second page of the form, you'll see that there is a box that does say that they will do all of them, so they don't have to check each and every one of these boxes. But it is important to go over what these responsibilities are. I know that all of us are making steps referrals for new consumers or for consumers who are having a tough time with their home care worker, and that's awesome. I understand from some of you in the field that there's been quite a waiting list for getting on to or out the steps person to get out to your OPI consumer's home. And if that's the case, this is, again, it needs to be done before they employ the home care worker. So you want to have this ready to go. When you go out to the field, I would encourage you to take 2 or 3 copies of this form for that one home visit. That way you can complete it, have the consumer sign it or their rep, give a copy to the rep, a copy to the consumer, and then you need a signed copy for your file. Again, this is a mandatory form. It doesn't need to be updated annually. It only needs to be updated if there's a change in the representative or if there's a change in the representative's duties. So I want to refer us, so I'm going to try this again and show you another page. And you're not going to see a screen now for a moment while I pull up something. Okay, are you seeing my screen? Oh, great. Thank you, Connie. Here is the staff tools page, and if you've talked with me and we've been talking about a specific situation, then I want you to be able to know the way to get here. So let me show you the manner. So here I am at the APD Case Management Tools website. And if you're unfamiliar with this, I encourage you to become familiar. Here you can see anything that has been a recent update, and there's been quite a few in the past couple of months with all of the home care worker voucher changes. A great quick link into the rules, and then specific procedures regarding some of the programs and services. For this, I'm going to go here into the in-home section, and then I'm going to look here at the client employer responsibilities. And this has information about when to make a referral for central office staffing. This would happen when you have a situation come up where a consumer is unable to fulfill their responsibilities and does not have someone that can take the role as their advocate for them. And I'm being asked if we could send a link to the website. Yes, and I will also have it in the tools. If you look at your handout, it wasn't on there. So when I send out the new folks your handouts, you'll see that I've updated some of the forms. But this goes through what to put in and where to send this. And if this information comes in, and here's the website, I would like you to know that they're going to staff cases with me as the OPI policy analyst here at the office. The other piece that I sent out to you today was the client employer responsibilities. And this is a 6-page document that goes through some of the concepts of what are we talking about when we talk locate, screen, and hire. What could some of the warning signs be? And I'm not going to read it to you, but I just want you to see that this could be helpful as you're brainstorming with your coworkers, with your managers. You know, what should we be doing about individual? What should I be doing? Am I doing enough? Am I not doing enough? Some of those kinds of things. Always we have steps on our side that we can turn to have their help and their encouragement and ideas. So we have supervising, training. We have interventions that might be necessary. How about work leave and coverage when they're away from the home, when the consumer, or excuse me, when the home care worker would be away? And then certainly all of us have had our fair turn at hearing the performance issues or deficiencies that the home care worker has when we've made home visits, and the consumer or their advocate family members are telling us about that. And, you know, it's their right to employ these individuals. So it's important for us to help them see that that's their job. We should never be the ones letting the home care worker know that they're terminated. That needs to be the role of the employer, of our consumer, or their representative. So this is a handy reference point. It's a little dated, as you can see down here at the bottom, from January of 2009, but I ran it by my coworkers here at Central Office, and they agreed it's still valuable, it still appears appropriate. So I think it's just an important one for us to be aware of. There's also some other really nice information that I want to reference here. There's this home care worker and agency comparison chart. There's the opportunity here to have contact, an in-home packet created, and it might be an idea of what do you want to carry out in the field with you when you're talking to consumers making a change, or you're talking to new consumers. It also has the printed materials here, and no APD, Department of Human Services, neither of them are going to print these for us any longer. I do believe that the STEPS program is giving out the employer guide, and of course, whomever is doing the orientation in your community, they are also giving out the home care workers guide. So STEPS is the employer guide, and then the home care workers are getting theirs through their orientation. Okay, I'm going to go back to my slide presentation. Okay, good. You can see this, it appears, so we'll go on. Those were the two probably most important forms I really wanted to go over. Is the workers' compensation form. It's been around for quite a while. Just want to emphasize how important that was, and then again to summarize how important the 737 is. If we come to a point where there is a challenge on a case regarding a hearing or a grievance, those forms may be called upon to come out of your desk file. So you want to be able to always keep these. They don't have to be updated annually, like I said. So they are important forms that I would keep in your desk file compared to any that you may archive. So now let's talk about the 546N, the in-home service plan. As we all know, this is over in Oregon Access. It's going to be in the CAP section and how we get to it and how it populates this. This should be pretty familiar for anyone who's been doing this work for any period of time. To know that it's a mandatory form. And it's a mandatory form because in essence, it's a work order that is spending taxpayer dollars. And when you are doing this, it's important that you go ahead and you sign these forms because it's showing that you're giving the authorization for the expenditure of these funds. Because it is, by nature, that kind of a form, this is a form that has to be archived, and it will be disposed upon or disposed of when that whole file can be disposed, which is 7 years after the death or the closure of a consumer file. So we really need to have the 546N in your current 546Ns in whatever you use as your working OPI consumer file. So think of this as this is going to be the consistently true service plan for this particular home care worker. These are the hours and that information. Let me look at some of our questions. We've got a couple of them that have come in. How do you add remarks to the 546? Well, you would, when you open the 546 and you go to the next or to the tab that it brings you to, there are remarks there and you can type into that section. It's not a completely open. I think it's limited to something like 300 or so characters that you can type in there. And the reason we're saying that it's important to put that is when you look at this form, it does not designate whether our consumer is OPI or Medicaid or on what program. So we have to inform whether you are a type B and you're working with a voucher clerk who handles both OPI and state plan personal care and Medicaid, but also to inform just it's the clarity on the piece of paper out of which program is this person. Because that doesn't show when you look up their prime number. It's only going to give you some other information. You have to kind of dig down to find out if they're on OPI. The next question was a clarity question regarding the 737 and the 354, asking if they do not have to be done at reassessment. They only have to be done at reassessment if you don't have them. So if you're looking through your desk file, maybe go back to your archive file, and you're not finding these forms, do them. But they do not need to be updated annually. There is not a requirement for that from the division in regards to these two forms. Whereas, good question for me to kind of jump on to, the 546 is every year it has to be updated. Even if they're keeping the same provider, the same contractor, have the same tasks, same hours, same duties, you still have to print a new one. Because there's an end date on every one of our 546s. And it will terminate, the example here was May 31st, and we need to have for the next period of time. So we want to go ahead and get that information into the desk file. So make sure you print off the new one even when there's no changes. The short form. Boy, this is an incredibly helpful form, and I hope some of you are already using this form. It's a wonderful way to communicate changes to your voucher clerk. And we're going to be talking about both home care workers and then later contract agencies. So I'm going to focus right now on home care workers. This is a great way to be able to help folks know what's happening and what the changes are. It's far better than a Post-it note, I say here, because those somehow get onto the back of something else. So the important piece here is that you want to put into this in the appropriate category on this short form what you want done. Say, for example, you have a home care worker who's going to be going away for a month, and the consumer has, for just that 1 month, hired another home care worker. You could go in and do a 546, or, and meaning you'd update your service plan with new hours and all of that, or you would go ahead and you could use a short form. And the short form then would be attached, because what we would be telling our voucher clerk with the short form would be to cancel the voucher for the time period they're going to be gone in the example I was using, and to create a voucher for this home care worker with this provider number for this time period so that they know what to do. And this needs a signature just like the 546. It's on the second page of the form. It's available through Oregon Access as a web form. So you would go to Forms and you would choose this. It would pull up the web form, and then you would complete it off from that. You don't complete it in Oregon Access, you complete it as a form. You can also pull it up from the form server, the DHS form server, and utilize it there. So some questions. If we do our own vouchers, do we still need to file this? Meaning the 546 and the 546 short form? If that's what you're referring to, Sarah, yes, because as a case manager, we should not be doing the oath and OPI. That should be a different person by virtue of a separation of duties. So it would be important for them to have a copy, and then they do whatever they do with that. They can, whether you guys give them the original and then they give the original back to you, or you give them a photocopy, follow whatever are your office practices. But it is still important to have a paper copy of both of the 546 short form and the 546, again, because you are authorizing the use of state dollars through the Oregon Project Independence. And if there was any kind of a situation where we had to research into expenditures, this would be the rest of the paper trail, showing why did we have vouchers going to this person for this number of hours, as well as any situations that could occur with a home care worker. Good question. Next on my list of in-home case manager home care worker forms is, oh, wait, we just got a question again about the short form, so I'm going to go back to that and answer this question. The short form doesn't make sense to me. So the question is, because this would not be on the Oregon Access service planning sheet, why would we be using it and not updating the service plan? When it's a temporary, and think about this as if a home care worker has leave hours to take and they're going to be gone for, in this situation, I will use the example of 2 weeks. So they're going to be working part of the month, but not part of the month. We need to for a short period of time, if the consumer has hired another individual to take their place, we need to get a voucher out to them. But because it's only going to be for 2 weeks of the 52-week plan that we have in place there, you can use a short form. Far easier to do than to end your plan, begin a new plan, to end it 2 weeks later to start 15 days after that. And then you narrate that you've done this and to see the short form. So in your case narration is where you're going to be doing the specifics of Sally Mae, home care worker, is going to take off from May 15th to May 30th, and Alice, the consumer, has approved that, and they would, consequently, you have done a short form, see short form for details to authorize Louise to be the new home care worker. Something along that lines is kind of the story that you think of with this. Hope that that helps make sense there for you. So now on to the next screen. This is the 4105. And I know while we have been talking to, or I've been talking to some of you out in the field, this was one of those, gee, I didn't know about that forms. And again, this is a mandated form. It's mandated because of the requirement in the union contract. And we have to show, and we show this by narration, that we have completed it and mailed it to the home care worker. This is not a form that goes to the consumer. This is only a form between you as the authorizing person to the home care worker. And that's the intent of it. Also make sure that you're using the most current form. This form has transitioned some in the past 3 years or so. So if you're using somebody's copy of something, please make sure that you go online and pull this down. This is going to come through or through the DHS form server. It's not in Oregon Access. According to the guidelines in the union contract, this is supposed to be provided to the home care worker on or before the work. Again, that's on or before. So just like the task list, if you will, this is an incredibly important document that tells them that effective this day, you will be working for this person this many hours. Or on this day, your hours will be changing to this, or you need to be excluding these services or including these services. Again, this is an incredibly important form for that labor contract piece. But also, there's not a requirement for us to keep it on file. So if your area agency on aging has said, hey, let's just go ahead and keep it in the consumer's file that it relates to, that's fine. But when you look at our form list, you're going to see that it doesn't say to keep it in the file. And it's just, you need to follow what your own agency's guidelines are regarding this. The task list for a home care worker. And you're going to have to forgive me because I'm going to get on a little bit of a soapbox here as we talk about this. Think about a task list, and of course we're accessing that through the CAP service plan. We go into the 546 details, and there's first the financial tab where we can put in our comments, and then the task list. And when we approve our service plan and we are complete, these are not editable. If you want to edit it, you have to go through those, particular pieces of fixing that. And you can give me a buzz if you don't know how to do that, and I'll walk you through some twos on doing that through Oregon Access. So here, the key that I want you to see is if it's not on the task list, they shouldn't be doing the task. This is their job description. If there is a workers' compensation claim, they can only have that insurance for the tasks that are related to the task list. So the task list, here's an example of one, and I used one because I only made one paper copy of it, for an agency, but it would be the same for a home care worker, where it's going to show what are the tasks that they're to do, as well as then the different pages for signing this. However, this is something, again, you need to follow your agency practices. There is nothing that says this has to be returned for the consumer record. So it doesn't have to be in your desk file. As long as you have narrated that you have sent it out to both the consumer or their rep and to the home care worker, and we do that separately. There was a period of time that we sent them all to the consumer or the representative to give to the home care worker. No longer do we do that. We send it out to both or all three of those individuals. And you need to sign the copies showing that you've authorized this and mail it out. And this shows the number of hours and the pay and the specific kinds of tasks that they will be doing while they do this work. Again, I'm not going to read to you information, and this is a really packed full page in our presentation today about the home care worker communication. It's important for you to know, and if you know that you have a consumer that could be challenging, if you will, the parameters of what the hours are for, perhaps they're going to say in a convincing way that they need to go shopping in a shopping mall that's an hour and a half away, and yet there is a grocery store closer. You know, you're going to have to help them, the home care worker, know what the parameters are and to give them permission to say no or to loop with you when that conversation is going on. So here, remember that home care workers cannot subcontract their own work to another person. So if they're doing the work, they're showing on their voucher their time in, their time out on that particular day. And if somebody else did their work that particular day and they're showing that, what is that called? It's called fraud. And when we discover that, we need to take action on that. Notice that one of the pieces that's in this information down at the bottom of the second column is not to purchase illegal drugs for the employer, and they shouldn't be going to the liquor store for the employer. That doesn't mean that if the consumer has buy my wine, buy my beer, and they're going to Food for Less to do their grocery shopping for them, that they can't pick that up. They can, but they can't on the way stop by the liquor store to pick up the bottle of Jack Daniels. That isn't part of what we are giving them shopping hours to do. There's a question here that let's address. It says, okay, does the individual have to do all the tasks on the task list? You know, the consumer is the one who directs their day-to-day work, but they can't do tasks that aren't on it. So if we have bathing, for example, and this person only wants to bathe maybe once a month, that is their call. But for that once a month that they're going to help with bathing, you've got it listed on there. Good question. Thanks for asking. The 546N for an in-home agency. Again, we are required to send this to the agency. This is part of the contract agreements that all of our AAAs have with their in-home contractors. Is they'll be informed of what the work plan is and their wages for that particular consumer. Again, it is important that we go ahead and we put on that this is an OPI consumer in our comments, in our remarks. And furthermore, if that agency in your particular AAA does the OPI billing for their services, then you also need to be telling them on your remarks what the percent of fee is if it's a one-time bill or if it is a one-time billing. You can also make further remarks here, perhaps something like would prefer to only have services on Wednesday afternoons. Whatever that particular point might be, perhaps speaks Spanish, would like to have only a Spanish-speaking provider, works better with male providers than female providers. Those kinds of hints and details can really help that agency do a better job in meeting the needs of our consumers. A short form, again, this is a great way to communicate changes in the plans and hours. Perhaps you've authorized a temporary increase in the number of hours. Again, you would narrate that information, and then you could put it here in the short form and send it on to the agency. It's better than a lost fax, just as I did with the sticky notes for the voucher clerk here. It's the fax I never received. I never understood that you wanted to put it on hold. I sent out a girl, now I'm going to bill you. So when we have consumers go in for hospitalization and we find out about it, letting our vendors know that their consumer is in the hospital and won't be able to be there for the services is an important piece of communication. And when we do it on a form such as this, there's a tracking of that, as well as you can narrate that then. So there's a question that we've received. It says this particular agency has their own form that reflects those types of preferences and needs. Do we need to fax this? So just know that if you've made an additional form, you need to do the task and this if it's for a home care worker. And the short form you don't have to do. It's only for when you're communicating changes during that service authorization period. And again, folks are asking for an agency, do we need to fax the 546N? If you fax them, if that's the best way to communicate with them, many agencies today are preferring that we scan and send them that way. That provides you a really great tracking method because you've got an email with the attachment sent and you need to send it then through secure means, or the fax. And again, that's going to vary on your contracts and what your agency's practice is. So follow your agency's practice is the best answer. A task list for a contract in-home agency. This is probably unusual for some of you to hear, but when you think about what is in a 546 and what's in a task list, there is no other way that they would know that what they're going to be doing, because the 546 essentially says you get 10 hours for self-management and you get 10 hours for ADL activities. But it doesn't say what ADL activities. It doesn't say whether that's bathing, mobility, elimination, eating. It doesn't say what particular IADLs or self-management tasks they are doing. So by communicating that via a task list to the contractor, you're being very clear with what's in your service plan. For all of us as AAAs, we have people who are doing oversight with our contracts, and so it's important to be able to show this follow through and clarity regarding this. Again, regarding all of the financial information on the 546N, we had another question on that. Follow your agency's guidelines. So if the in-home agency does not do the billing for the 0%, that's fine. You just need to follow your agency practice. But if that agency does do the billing, then you do need to be communicating it. The risk tool. So now I'm going into some areas that many of us have had training on before. I'm going to be reviewing over the 3 specific OPI forms and how we complete those. Again, feel free to keep asking questions. I will get to them as I see them come up. The risk assessment tool. Remember that this risk assessment tool becomes incredibly important as we go into a legislative year where we once again have to show the worthwhileness of our program, Oregon Project Independence. So likely in the next 6 months, we will be hearing from our directors that you need to be gathering this information, and we need to be submitting this information either to the State Unit on Aging and to O4AD. And be aware that all of that gets scrubbed, so we aren't giving out private information. What we're looking at is the overall trends and whom we are serving. This is a form that has to be completed when someone is put on a wait list, and we keep track of that on our wait list system. It should also then be updated and completed at the time of the OPI intake. And then finally, at each annual review. And lastly, at the reassessment or the final disposition. And there's a final section on page 3 of this form, or at the end of the RTZ if you're doing it directly into RTZ. You need to narrate that you've completed this form. And again, follow your agency direction. So the first part of this form is really self-explanatory and should be asked as you are doing the assessment. You can discern what is coming up out of that, what their needs might be. The caveat with this risk tool is this is as the consumer is answering. This is not a third party's answers on behalf. Now, if they have a rep because of their cognition abilities, yes, that's fine. But otherwise, this isn't your opinion of whether these things are true or not true. This would be asked of the consumer, the representative. A question from the field is the risk assessment tool. This tool we're looking at required when we close an OPI client. We'll be looking at the section. We're going to be answering that here in just a moment. If you put your answers in the little gray boxes, it will automatically add up for you if you're using the form from the form server. It is automated in that manner. As you also see, it does it when you are in the RTZ program. Section 2, these are the only questions that we ask regarding finances. They're in Section 9, as well as the question about who has concerns about you and to what degree are they concerned. And based upon the combined score of sections 1 and 2 is where we come up with whether this individual is of a high risk or a moderate, low, or no risk. So these final questions, these are for statistical purposes. The initial assessment, we answer the first 2 about hospitalization and ER. And then, as you see here, the very end, what is the reassessment or final disposition on this record? And we're looking at, have they enrolled in Medicaid, moved to a facility, passed away, had ER visits, some of those kinds of factors. And this is important so that we're able to see information about why individuals are moving off from Oregon Project Independence. The fee determination sheet. Again, this is mandated to be updated annually. This is based upon the household's net income. Now, the definition for household is in our Oregon Project Independence rule, and it defines it as individual, spouse, and any dependent as defined by the IRS. So this is very different than our partners in Medicaid. They define household, and in the SNAP program, they define household completely differently. So if in the IRS, if we have a married couple and one of them is in a nursing home and the other is living at home, but they would still be considered that they would be filing taxes together, their household. So you would count both of their incomes and their expenses, including the expense for the nursing home stay. But if grandma is living with her daughter and family, but they don't claim her as a dependent, then a household of one. The fee determination allows us to deduct. We look ultimately at what is their net monthly income. So ultimately, we're looking at all of their income and then their medical deductions. And medical deductions includes our Medicare premiums if those were not already deducted when we put in the the Social Security income. It would be other health insurance premiums, doctor visits and co-pays, over-the-counter meds if the doctor has ordered them, meds, herbal remedies, again, if recommended by the doctor, equipment, dentures, durable medical equipment, nursing care, but not if they're hiring someone to come in and do yard work. That wouldn't be personal. That wouldn't be medical. And notice the very last line here. Non-custodial child support is an allowable deduction on Oregon Project Independence. I frankly do not know the last time we used that, but it is there by rule. So then once we come up with their net income, we would need to look at the OPI table and see where do they fall and to what percentage do they come. So make sure that you have the most current version. This was updated just in February of 2016, so make sure you have that. It's also listed over on the State Unit on Aging's website, and that way you would have that. We have a question. Do we count VA pensions and Aidan attendance as an income? We do, because they are used as an income for their expenses. So, there would be all forms of income, even if they have rental income or maybe they sold something on contract, that would come in as income, and we would ask for that question. Good question. So we also need to take this information that we have from this form, and then we need to put it onto Oregon Access. So notice where you're at here in this picture. You're in Oregon Access in the Consumers file. You're over at the Benefits tab, and it shows your name as the worker, service worker, OPI worker, and then you would move over, and the OPI box is checked or marked. You would move over to service. Now they also need to show at the very bottom of that page with your name on it, on the front page of the benefits section, that kind of green swirly section, you need to show under the service areas that they are the primary applicant for that service. So when you do that, it's going to give you this section, and you want to go ahead and complete those areas in blue where the arrow is in the second picture. You need to update this annually. So what is their monthly fee? Then secondly, what is their OPI percentage amount? Those come directly off from that form and need to be updated. Now, the reason we need to be updating this is that periodically reports are pulled out of Oregon Access on this. Far easier to do this than for all of us to go back to all of our files and look at them to see what is the incomes of our various consumers. So it's an important thing to put, and if you haven't been updating it, it does default to 0, but you have to override it. You have to write on top of it for it to be updated. We talked about our fee schedule and where to find it. A question we have would be, do you have to complete the information in the service tab if they don't have a pay-in? Yes, because that's also important for us to know. One of the questions that the legislature or those who do oversight for Oregon Project Independence ask is how many of your consumers get these services with no fee. And the only way we have of doing that information is pulling it out of that field on Oregon Access. So it is important to put it in there. It's also important that that's accurate and not overinflated. So if you haven't been doing that, I appreciate you stepping up and filling it in as you go through and do it. Here's the OPI Service Agreement, and we don't have our consumers do a rights and responsibilities. We don't have them sign anything that says I understand what my responsibilities are. It's just here on this particular form. So this is going over what is their responsibility, what are they going to be receiving. It shows what the adjusted income is going to be based upon our calculations. Oops. And so it's important that we go ahead and we complete all of this form. They need to sign both this form and the financial form. And yes, that does mean you need to have it back in your desk file. Yes, it means we keep it until that file is destroyed. The reason for this has to do with just the follow through of the program. Things that have your signature and the consumer's signature tend to be permanent records. It needs to be updated annually because the costs, the hours, and things that are included in this particular form can be changed and updated. Any questions about this? Okay. So moving forward then to some of our privacy paperwork. The Notice of Privacy Practices is the 2090, and that's found in Oregon Access in the web forms, and you can print it out of that. This form was recently updated, if you will, back in January of 2014, so it's important you're using a current one. This is only 6 pages long, whereas the old one was much longer. And it's written in a much more user-friendly terminology than the old one. So use it. This should go out at least once in the consumer's time on OPI. You don't have to give it each and every time, just once. Narrate that it was given. You also have the option then of having them sign, and you keep on your records the 2092, and that's also in Oregon Access, and that's the acknowledgement of the receipt of the privacy rights or privacy practice. I say on this slide that it's a required piece because ultimately, if there is a breach of confidentiality and the consumer chooses legal action regarding that particular breach, the deep pocket in our contractual agreement is the state, and the state is going to expect that we have completed the forms. And then when you look at the contract between the state to your AAA to do Oregon Project Independence, it also states there that you're going to be doing the forms related, or you're going to be utilizing the guidelines and practices of privacy. Then we have the 2099, and this is the authorization for disclosure of information. This is only good for the 12 months after it is signed. So, or they could say that this is only good for a certain period of time as they complete it. So there's a wonderful form, and I'm not going to go over this information. I knew that we'd be out of time, and we are just about there. And that is, look at the 2099I. And in that, and you can find that on the form server, it has wonderful instructions on how to go ahead and complete this form. The other common question that would come up regarding forms is, do we have an OPI denial notice? And no, we don't. Each of our consumers get what your particular agency has developed. There's the grievance procedure that every AAA has that is unique to that AAA. The guidelines for that are found in our OPI rules, but there is not a universal denial, reduction, or termination letter or notice. So that is the end of our webinar today on forms related to Oregon Project Independence. I'm going to stay on the line for a few more moments to answer questions. You will be receiving probably on Monday a questionnaire regarding how we did on this particular training and if we could make any improvements, that kind of information. So go ahead, and again, I encourage you to text chat your questions, and I'll answer them as I can here while we're still online. Thank you today for your attendance. There's a question about, can we email our questions to you so that you can ask them? Of course, anytime. That's what I'm here to do and to help you. The question is, will the training be available on the SUA site for training? And yes, it will. It will be posted there in about 7 to 10 working days. So within the next 2 weeks, it will be posted as we have to transcript it. And it will be posted there on the training site. Where is the OPI fee schedule located is the question, and you can see that on the action request, and the action request was in February of 2016. It's also on the SUA website, and let me get you that action request. I'm looking it up. It's AR 16014. Well, it's looking like folks are leaving and I'm not getting any more questions. So I'm going to go ahead and close us down. I want to thank you for your attendance today, and we'll be talking to you as time passes. Thank you.